You've spoken about prejudice. For one of the peculiarities about prejudice is that it seems always to speak from the heart. It seems in some daring way to be speaking the truth, to be saying what others secretly believe, but do not have the courage to say themselves. And the man who speaks against prejudice can often come to seem like the peddler of shop-worn banalities, while the voice of prejudice can seem bold and original, a lone voice with the power to drown out others, the power to subdue. Now, this is a thread that also is in your book. Your reaction to Hindutva, which I'll come to a little later. But what I wanted to ask you is related to this passage. Have you experienced prejudice in your life? A young boy brought up in a Sikh household, then going to Pakistan, and so with your feet in many different countries. What has been your personal experience?
Yeah. An education in comparative fanaticism, really, it has been true, because I grew up in the Sikh household where I said that there was this anti-Hindu kind of prejudice. It was in the 80s. Very quickly I was exposed to, around the time of the Babri Masjid, for personal reasons, to really disgusting anti-Muslim prejudice. And it was very, very upsetting for me, because it was very near to me. And I was growing up as a child in a household where I knew I had a Muslim father, but I'd never met him. And when I look back on that situation, I think that it was wrong for me to be in an environment where I was hearing such ugly things about Muslims. And I would have liked for someone to have intervened and said, like, this is really, because it was very confusing. And it was talk, the kind of which I'd never heard before in India. It was very new, that kind of talk. And then, well, I've written about this in Stranger. When I did go over to Pakistan, there was a lot of anti-Hindu type talk. Weirdly, it was like a resonance of what I'd heard from the Sikhs when I was growing up. So it didn't, and by that point I was an adult and knew how to cope with it. But it was, all along I'd seen it, which is why when people say, you know, I think this line is in the book, when people say, oh, India is secular to her villages, it's just simply not true. You just have to take someone aside. He has to believe that you are of whatever particular community he is, and he will confide to you the vilest possible things about the guy standing 10 yards away from him.
That happened to me in Pakistan when I was being taken around during Nawaz Sharif's election, taken around by a friend of my father's. And he said, just say you're from Karachi when you're interviewing people because you dress like that. I said, okay. And then I heard the vilest things about India and Hindus, which normally they wouldn't have. They would have shown me the greatest of hospitality if I had said I was Indian.
Because they're very gracious,
yes.
So exactly.
But I find it a very chauvinistic graciousness.
Yeah.
Just to prove that, you know, we're so gracious.
Yeah.
What's in your heart, I think, is what should be graciousness.
Yeah.
So I sort of take that with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
But so you went through a rather difficult childhood with all this exposure. Did you argue with people when you were in Pakistan when they spoke about Hindus that way?
By then I could. When you're a child, you don't know the lay of the land.
So you did?
In Pakistan, and by that point I did. I mean, especially with my father, a lot of this stuff bubbled up, and later then I was even with people in India when I would encounter it. But now I think that I like to listen. I don't like to play an activist role. It's really boring.
Aatish, you've written about Kalidas's descriptions of women. And in this, one character of yours says, these are the beautiful women of the town. My father would always say, these goons in saffron, they say they want a Hindu renaissance. They have no idea what a Hindu renaissance would entail. Their shitty little values about sex and food would be the first thing to go out of the window. But try telling them that. Now, the Hindutva that has come in and is spoken about, and the kind of actions groups have taken, Hindutva groups have taken against, say, Valentine's Day and girls drinking in bars or whatever, is very different from the Hinduism or the poetry that you've studied of Kalidas. How can we break this? How is it possible at all to break this Victorianism in the Hindutva that has now been invented.
I met a professor the other day, a man called Arvind Sharma, and he said, before we say anything about what's happening, let's just say what a revolutionary moment, neutrally speaking, we stand at, where you have Hindus practicing conversion, unheard, and converting Muslims back in. So these are people we can say that have gone very far from themselves. I mean, in the sense that they literally have remade themselves as Muslims. They've taken this kind of Hindu content and they've merged Victorian Christianity and Islam, and they've come back with a mutant.
Because Hinduism does not in any place say that we should convert people.
Not even.
And that was such a high moral ground to be at, that we don't convert, we don't have 10 commandments, we don't have fatwas. And now it's been reduced to a mirror image of a fundamentalism that doesn't really belong in Hinduism.
It has, and people don't realize that if you change the frame, if you remake something like that, you don't end up with what you have. You end up doing like tremendous violence to the past. And these are people, I think, who actually hate the past, because when they go to it, it doesn't give them what they want. You know, actually, with Islam and Christianity, if you do want that kind of fierce Bible-thumping stuff, they have that kind of God. He can give them that. And actually, it feeds very well into certain ideas like the nation state. This was a culture that was incredibly complex, even in when it spread politically, it had no political ambitions as such. There was always this sense, people are wrong to say that there wasn't a sense of India. There was a very powerful ancient sense of India. It was just not of a nation state defended by armies with a single polity. It was a very sophisticated and kind of beautiful sense of cultural incorporation in which an incredible amount of diversity was allowed to remain. And these people, if you give them half a chance, they will edge this stuff out. And what they're offering is so tawdry. It's so ugly.
Yeah, it goes back to this question of history that you've written about, that one of the historical references you've written, a man willing to let history be what it was, without wanting to ram it into a frame which answered the needs of a particular group or caste or faith. But isn't it difficult to decide what it was, since it has already been written by vested interests, by colonial writers, by post-colonial writers?
And you can balance all that, you're right. I mean, there's probably no country on earth where it's more complicated to form an idea of the past than India. I mean, there's very little doubt about that. You have to approach it with an open mind. You have to approach it with intellectual interest, rather than wanting it to be a certain way. When you feel that urge, it's usually coming from another place. Usually it's not, and the way that, like, there's a moment in the book at the end where he says, I guess there are only two kinds of people. People of the mind and people who are not of the mind. And the way that I would stand apart from this lot is because of really that they're the enemies of the mind. And that is where I would part ways with them, you know?
Isn't it more important to be people of the heart?
No, I value the mind.
Really?
I feel like if the intellect is given half a chance, it's a great thing. And a lot of this is apparently coming from the heart. I mean, a lot of this feeling, and look what a lot of harm it does.
I don't think it's coming from the heart. It's coming from some other
They
part
think
of the
it
anatomy.
comes from the They think it comes from the heart, you know?
There is the thread of personal relationships that explore the intellectual positions of political and social mores in Delhi particularly. For people who know Delhi society, you have described characters that are completely recognizable.
Convincing.
Convincing. Some readers have dismissed your book as gossip. You have been quite ruthless in exposing these people. In some cases, to my knowledge, and from my reading of the book, you've also exposed people who have looked after you, loved you, taken care of you. You've actually denuded not only yourself, but a lot of people around you.
Yeah.
Stephen King has said good fiction is the truth inside a lie. You know of Truman Capote's book Answered Prayers.
Right.
Okay, when he wrote about
course.
his society lady friends, who then stopped taking his calls. Is this book your answer to, like, fuck you Delhi, I'm going to New York?
No, not at all. You don't understand. Like, it's never from a position of malice or anything. People, firstly, like, let me say that almost any writer you can think of, what you have used are like the famous examples of what they would call like some kind of roman clay or a society novel. But Tolstoy was ripping up his wife's family to make the Rostovs in War and Peace. Like, every writer has models, and they use them. And something like Proust, for instance, was dismissed as gossip. So many big themes in the background, and people were like, oh, this is like just looking to read. So this is a tiny circle of drawing room people, and I would never expect anything more from them. This is their level, and they would go through it. And you know from the book that it's full of and firstly, it's my materials. It's the group. No one would fault someone who grew up in the middle classes for writing about his world. So I'm writing about things that are my direct material, nor am I glamorizing these people, you know. And when you think back and you think, well, he's looking hard at a very powerful section of a society in a country where this power has meaning, you would feel that there was something more important going on than simply exposing certain people or whatever. I don't even care about those people. And as you said, it's indiscriminate. It's got nothing to do with whether I like them or don't like them. Some people inspire my imagination and others don't, and they creep into your fiction. It's almost an involuntary thing.
But do you think they would be hurt?
I hope not. I hope they can understand that they served as the model for something. Often there are people mixed into one and the other, which is why it's such a mistake to read directly like that. I've done what I can in some instances to conceal, but in others it's very difficult to, because there's certain things about someone that go to the very heart of them, you know, and you actually, invention fails before something like that. And so I would hope that they would understand that this is how all writers have worked. And
so
that
everyone around you is material?
Everyone is. And I would like very much for them to know that they shouldn't tell me something they don't want to one day see in a book. Like, really, don't find someone else.
Guy.
Find someone else to make.
That's really scary,
you know,
for people who live around you.
Well, I think that it's scary for anyone who's connected to a writer. People, you know so many examples of people who've used their children, who've used their, you know,
yes.
and it's true. Writers work from life.
So you said it a few seconds ago that invention fails you. There's one character in the book whose real name you have used, Tunu. You write at length about how Tunu comes and beats up Uma, Skanda's mother. It exposed to me more than anything else something that I've experienced personally. When you live alone in a place like Delhi, a woman alone is fair game and unprotected. And somehow there's a psychological change in people that the minute they sense a woman's alone, she's very attackable.
Yeah.
An easy target. Was there an element of revenge when you wrote this chapter?
I don't know if it was revenge, but it was certainly, like, the world I was trying to describe was a world that was very violent inside and violent outside. And I mean, here we are, like, stepping out of the line of fiction, and I don't want to go too far into that, but I felt it was an unbelievable level of violence for a child to be exposed to. And it was something that, in a novel like this, it would have been hard for certain experiences in the life of a writer not to come into the fiction. And
the trauma of a 6-year-old who felt guilty for opening the door.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how to talk about this without revealing too much. You know, it's weird. It's still, those incidents also, they still produce shame in a strange way. Even though you're the victim, they produce a feeling of shame.
Shame? Why? It's something that somebody else should be feeling, no? The perpetrator.
In a sense, it's what Skanda, that it's a feeling of emasculation. And it's not something that, like, I'm not making this up. You'll often feel in certain minorities who are sometimes exposed to the violence of the state, feel shame like that. You know, it's a documented phenomenon. And yeah, it was certainly a trauma from childhood.
So, would we say that we have dealt with all your traumas now in this book? Are we going to have a fresh lot next time?
You shouldn't look at it like that, because it's really you know, it's really what you make of it. And I really feel that this is that relationship between the imagination and reality. It's not confessional. This is a very complicated, very big book with very many themes. And so it's not simply that a writer looking in need for release, but you know, there are, and there's always new experience, you're adding to things, but sometimes, you know, like, I think a writer will always keep returning in certain, I mean, there are certain things that become part of the contours of your imagination, as it were. And so I don't know the answer to that. I'm writing a book of nonfiction next, so there won't be anything like that. But I don't think of this as a personal book.
It's a very personal book.
Yeah, but
How can you say that, Aatish? It is so personal. It is taking off layers of political layers, emotional layers, human layers around people around you. It is, to me, it was like stripping everything bare.
No, it was, but for me, like that, the intent was a public intent. It was not, like Stranger to History was a deeply personal, you know, in the sense that it had to do with me. Mm-hmm. With this, I feel like it's a very strong engagement with my place and country. And that's what sets it apart in some ways.
Yeah. Thank you, Aatish, very much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that, click up here to support us and down here to subscribe. Be sure to check out our older episodes and the other stuff we do, like Can You Take It, I Agree, panel discussions, comics and animations, and much, much more.